Good evening and welcome to our September 3rd Thursday lecture. My name is Ryoko Matsuba and I work here at the Sainsbury Institute as the lecturer in Japanese Digital Art and Humanities. This evening, we are welcoming Helen McCarthy to hear her talk entitled UK Anime and Manga Fanzines 1985 to 2000. Before the lecture starts, our acting executive director, Dr. Eugenia Bogdanova-Kuma, will give opening remarks to welcome our audience. Eugenia.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our autumn Third Thursday lectures. We had a break in August, and I hope everybody had a good, productive summer. And I'm really excited that we're back and that we have Helen with us tonight. Thank you for joining, and I'm looking forward to our talk. With best wishes for the new academic year and the starting semester, and welcome to the new season of Thursday lectures. Thank you so much, and I'm handing back to Ryoko to introduce the speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugenia. Today's speaker, Helen, is an independent scholar and author of numerous publications related to anime and manga. She wrote the first book in English on anime, the first book in English on a single anime author, and co-founded and edited the first professional anime magazine in Britain, Anime UK Magazine, which ran from 1991 to 1996. Helen was one of the contributors to the British Museum's manga exhibition in 2019. This evening, we will have the privilege of hearing her lecture on anime and manga fanzines from the first 15 years of UK fandom. The session will run until around 7, followed for 10 minutes by a Q&A. There are two different text boxes. One is the chat box and the other is the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. Please post your question for Helen in the Q&A box either before or during the Q&A session. I will now hand over to Helen.
Thank you, Ryoko, and thank you, Eugenia, for that very kind introduction. I'm Helen, and I've been an independent scholar working on anime, manga, and Japanese popular culture since 1981. I started this study to capture and document anime and manga fanzine history in Britain prior to the arrival of mass broadband access in the mid to late 2000s. Our knowledge of this era in fandom relies very heavily on the unreliable, the ephemeral, the anecdotal. I lived through the history I'm discussing this evening, and my memory of it is patchy and partial, and my archives are incomplete. A reminder to all of us that eyewitness accounts and lived experience are only part of the overall picture that we as scholars must consider. I know other scholars, including Leah Mariel Holmes, are already working in the field of UK anime fandom history, and I hope that I can contribute to this joint work of creating a solid foundation for an impartial, reliable, accurate story of how British anime and manga fanzines evolved, influenced and were influenced by the growing fandom around them, and the wider economic and technological context in which they grew, flourished briefly, and died. Or perhaps I should say transmuted themselves, because like the dinosaurs, they are alive today in other constantly evolving forms. This talk will sketch the background to the emergence and growth of British anime and manga fandom and fanzines, a slow burn from art house cinema showings in the 50s and 60s to the advent of home video in the 80s. From the first dedicated anime fanzine, which predated any real anime market by several years, and the growing interest in anime and manga and intersecting fandoms, we'll note the major types of fanzines emerging. And as broadband and new digital design technologies become more widely available and the demand for print publication declines, as we'll see, fanzines and their creators adapted. One note of caution, as with any fandom, and anyone who's ever been a member of a fandom, whatever it is, knows this, UK anime and manga fan history includes a few problematic individuals with unacceptable behaviors that emerged only over time. In their early days in the fandom, these individuals were widely accepted and even celebrated. But as time went on, patterns of abusive behavior began to emerge. So although this presentation highlights the positive creative energies of UK anime and manga fandom, we as scholars should always bear in mind that fandom and individuals can present a darker side. I want to mention right at the beginning some of the research resources and archives already available for UK anime fandom. I tend to dislike slides that are mass type. So this is really for you to copy, photograph, take away, and give you some reference background. Of course, I've also made use of the fanzine listings in Anime UK magazine, which covered British fanzine activity from 1992 to 1996. The magazine was deposited with the Copyright Receipt Office, so it should be available through the UK's 6 copyright libraries. Carlo Bernardi has begun to archive his memories and documents on a site and YouTube channel known as the Anime Nostalgia Facility. Jonathan Weeks, creator of a newsletter called Animation, has put its archives from 1992 to 2004 online. Jim McLennan began a fanzine called Trash City in 1989, and its entire run is archived online. I'll mention many fans' publications ideas in the course of this story, but there are many others that I don't mention here because there's still a lot of work to do. There are still some fans with fanzine collections, and I want to thank Laura Watton Davis for generously making her own material available. And there's also a small amount of bibliographic and scholarly reference, particularly in the work of John A. Lent. So we have the beginnings of a research foundation. But let's remind ourselves of the context in which British anime and manga fandom came to be. More than 3 decades of sporadic film screenings, localized TV broadcasts, video rental and purchase finds, and fan contacts and conventions across a range of fandoms in and outside the UK, profoundly multicultural, profoundly intersectional from the start. 15th of October 1959, the 3rd London Film Festival held 2 subtitled screenings of Hakujaden, the first full-color anime film from Toei, under the title White Snake Enchantress. The film had only come out in 1958, so this was just a year after it was made that it was being seen in London. In September 1961, it got a general cinema release, this time with an American dub and under the title Panda and the Flying Serpent. The Monthly Film Bulletin for 1961 recorded this, and the January 62 issues noted English language cinema releases for Sayuki, a 1960 film, and Shonen Saratobi Sasuke, a 1958 film, under the titles Alakazam the Great and The Magic Boy, respectively. The reviews, as Leah Holmes notes in her MPhil thesis, were quite positive, balancing their inevitable comparisons with Disney, with praise for the film's overall aesthetics and narrative flow, and acknowledging their Japanese origins. But like these films, the 1970 release of Gulliver's Travels Beyond the Moon and the 1978 release of Space Battleship Yamato as Space Cruiser were assumed to be American because British audiences saw US dubs. Incidentally, thinking about Gulliver's Battles Beyond the Moon, a rookie named Hayao Miyazaki worked as an in-betweener on it and contributed ideas for the film's ending. So the first UK screening of a movie featuring Hayao Miyazaki's work took place in 1970, a quarter of a century before most British filmgoers would even hear of him. The first anime on UK TV, Marine Boy, was shown on the BBC from February 1969 to July 1971. Although, as you can see from that entry in Radio Times next to the Marine Boy still, headed Mary Hopkin, with a much longer write-up, it didn't get much attention. Marine Boy, a cartoon series, and that was it. And again, it was widely presumed to be an American series because it was dubbed in America. Children's TV all over Europe was bolstered to some extent by American versions of Japanese cartoons because they were cheap. And if you didn't want an English soundtrack, it didn't cost as much to redub into the local language, French, Italian, Spanish, whatever, as to buy a newly made local show. Economics and possibly post-war racism drove the decision to buy American. Battle of the Planets, 1978, which was a localized version of the sci-fi action series Science Ninja Team Gatchaman, and Euro-Japanese co-productions like The Mysterious Cities of Gold in 1982, or before that, Ulysses 31 in 1981, were co-produced by French writer Jean Chalopin and Japanese producers for NHK and Nagoya Broadcasting Network, and for French TV were dubbed from French into English for English TV. Nothing could be more transnational than these movies. And thinking of nothing, nothing ever actually begins at the point at which you first notice it, the point when we see it first. Everything, every life, every creative project, every movement starts in small, often unnoticed ways, the results of current in a culture or a relationship that can't be identified till they're examined. The ecosystem that gave birth to British anime and manga fandom evolved in SF magazines, SFF conventions, TV and movie enthusiasts, the fan clubs they belong to, science buffs, mod-like kit builders, costumers, and both roleplay and video game enthusiasts. And all these activities developed skills in their participants that later fed into their activities at anime and manga fandom. A buzz began to develop around anime and manga in 1980s Britain, thanks to US and European TV and also toy imports. Fans, especially science fiction fans, quickly realized that these cartoons on kids' TV were full of ideas and visuals that they found appealing and intriguing. From 1982 to 1985, Ray Rimmel edited a bi-monthly science fiction magazine for Argus Press in Britain, known variously as Space Voyager and New Voyager. Alongside information on space science, new space-themed films and TV, and new tech like the emergent home computer market, it also ran features on toys and model kits, and that's why it's here. Because this spring 1984 issue contained what may be the first documented reference to anime in a British publication. Plastic model kits exported from Japan to American companies had begun to reach the UK, and they caused a sensation among SF fans, space enthusiasts, model makers, and gamers. But we still didn't really have much of a clue what anime was all about. And there were also several small children's video labels in the UK in the mid to late 1980s, releasing what was perceived to be badly made kids stuff from right across Europe, the USA, and Japan in American dubs. These labels included Kids Cartoon Collection, Krypton Force, Parkfield Playtime, and MyTV. And many of their releases originated with the US distributor Harmony Gold, who bought up cartoon rights for the hungry US children's TV market and monetized their investment in English translations by selling their American dubs. Regardless of a title's origin, all these small labels packaged their shows in Western design sleeves intended to fit an overall label identity, something parents and children could easily spot in a video store. Everything was packaged to fit the distributor's intended market of preschool and elementary school children. Anime titles included an edited version of the movie Panda and the Magic Serpent, and a 1987 thoughtful, mature video, Once Upon a Time, based on Windaria, 1986, not really suitable for its audience, an edit of Ninja the Wonder Boy, Manga Saratobi Sasuke, and Crushers, an edited version of Crusher Joe, a teenage space opera released in 1983. A handful of other titles, such as Warriors of the Wind, a heavily edited version of Miyazaki's Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind, was also released on video in the 1980s. And Speed Racer joined the video release from Ecstasy Video in 1987. Dubbed, widely sold in the USA, so very cheap in the UK. And the growing home video market in the UK and the spread of video rental stores were both key to making these titles available to a target market that hadn't been identified or named yet, anime fans. Most video rental shops and sales outlets carried a wide range of low-priced cartoons, perennially popular with parents who were increasingly using video as a babysitter, and friends who met through other fandoms, Star Trek, SF, fantasy, or gaming, shared information within their own small groups or at events about these purchases in children's video sections in shops. So far, there were no books on anime and manga. There was only passing reference in reference works claiming to set out the worldwide history of comics or animation, but I searched thoroughly at the time, and the books I found were in European languages, and apart from very occasional brief references, made no attempt to include Asian or African cinema or animation. So there we were starting to see anime. We were starting to have some awareness of anime, but we still didn't know where we were going. And then in 1986, the first anime fanzine appeared. Anthony John Luke, known as Tony Luke and later as Tony Kuroizumi Luke, was born in 1966 and died aged 49 in February 2016. My partner and I met him through Super Mario Nation fandom when he was still a teenager. And he was later to recall that Super Mario Nation influence in other works. But he was passionate about the American TV series Robotech, a show he'd watched at US bases where his father was a contractor all over Britain. And he somehow managed to get in touch with the creator, Carl Maychek, who'd produced the show from a mashup of 3 separate Japanese series, and blagged an interview. His aim in his 18-page zine was to try and generate interest in a British release of the anime TV series Robotech. And it was purely out of love for the show, which he absolutely adored, that he wanted to do this. 18 pages of A4 black and white photocopy put together entirely by Tony, with a little editorial help from me and cover art by Steve Kite. And apart from background information on the Robotech story, it consists entirely of the Maychek interview, which is probably the earliest American anime creator interview available, certainly in Britain. Tony hoped that if he generated enough interest, a British TV company would pick up the show. But since it had never been seen on UK television, the zine had a very limited audience, so its ability to generate interest in seeing the show was similarly limited. My recollection is that Tony first talked to us about the zine in the winter of 85-86, and that it was published in the spring of 1986, probably around March, but I've got no independent verification. The zine itself is undated. 2 years later, Tony was to create the anime-inspired heavy metal horror anti-hero Dominator, the character for which he is best known. Dominator featured for a while in the pages of Japanese anthology Comic Afternoon, and thus making Tony one of the earliest Westerners to contribute manga to a Japanese manga anthology, a fact of which he was enormously proud. But once the anime genie was out of the bottle, others started to work with it. And gaming fans were among the most dedicated. MechTech, a fanzine by gaming fan and miniature painter Ashley Watkins, was a spin-off from the active SF Wargames fandom, centered around battlesuit game systems such as Battletech, many of which used Japanese anime and manga robots in their systems. Ashley offered new rules and scenarios for players in Battletech systems, plus information on the robots and their origins in Japan. Unlike many fanzines and small press offerings, MechTech was distributed in a very interesting way. You see, at the time, there was virtually no advertising open to fanzine creators. You couldn't afford to buy ad space because you were an independent fanzine creator. There weren't many places you could buy ad space. There was no internet. So creators like Ashley went to the gaming shops where they got their games equipment and persuaded gaming shops to rack their fanzines on a sale or return basis. And it was a win-win for both. Owners would just lose a little shelf space at no cost to them and would make some money if the zine sold. Zine editors would have the opportunity of getting new passing trade. And the worst that could possibly happen is that the zines would come back to them unsold. It was a low-cost, risk-free option for the publisher and zero risk for the retailer. Ashley Watkins was a long-time friend of mine within SF Fandom, and he also publicized the 1990 EasterCon in MechTech issue 3 and passed on my contact details as organizer of the EasterCon anime stream to anime-curious fans such as Carlo Bernardi. Gaming fandom woke up to anime and manga before most other UK fandoms, largely because of the number of popular console games and game systems from Japan, but also because the game fandom fraternity tended to be tech savvy. They were interested in the latest kit, and they had good contacts in gaming distribution to pick up on new titles and new information. On Lee was a Nottingham-based gaming fan who started producing his own handmade photocopied zine, PC Engine Fanatics, in 1989. And an epic total of 40 issues appeared under 4 titles until 1995, all created by On, all aimed at driving interest in gaming, consoles, latest news from all over the world. But as you can see there on the front of issue 1, new from Japan, what's available for the engine and not from the land of the rising sun now and in the future. So there was a definite Japan focus there, which opened up the possibility of looking at anime-related and manga-related gaming. Lee was able to secure advertising from a number of gaming distributors and publications and get reciprocal advertising in those publications. And he and some of his contributors went on to work in professional publications. Gaming fans have archived the zines, and they are treasure troves of details in all sorts of fashions useful for fanish research. Details of game shops, suppliers, advertisers, prices, reviews, news. Absolutely wonderful resources, and as I say, archived online and widely available. Incidentally, there is a rumor going around on Fandom, and I haven't had much of a chance to check it out yet, that On Lee's sister was one of the first of the Teletubbies for the BBC's TV show. In the USA, anime fandom had begun to get off the ground in 1977 with the founding of the Cartoon Fantasy Organization in California. But its first nationwide growth spurt came in 78 and 79, when 2 US dubbed Japanese SF action series, Star Blazers and Battle of the Planets, or Space Cruiser Yamato and Science Ninja Team Gatchaman, aired at school-friendly times in the early morning and late afternoon. They attracted not only eager school children, but teenage SF fans, and generated screenings at SF conventions and even some fan clubs. But most of that activity had settled a bit by the mid to late 1980s. The Star Blazers fan club had been inactive since 1984, the Battle of the Planets fan club since 1983. Earth Defense Command in Texas was sporadically active, and the Cartoon Fantasy Organization was in process of restructuring, when a female fan called Lorraine Savage from Rhode Island first saw anime in another fan's room at a Boston science fiction and fantasy convention in 1986. Now, Lorraine founded America's most broadly successful anime fan club, Anime Hashin, which ran from 1987 to 2001 and embraced members in the USA, Canada, Australia, and Europe, as well as members in American forces bases in Japan. At its peak, membership numbered almost 500, and several Anime Hashin members were among those who provided tapes for the first anime video screening in Britain at EastCon 90. First generation UK anime fans Carlo Bernardi and Jay Felton were among the members, and the newsletter of Anime Hashin, The Rose, was one of the models that helped to inform Carlo's Anime Kyo Club and its newsletter Anime Kyo News. But there was also wider fandom input in many, many ways. Jim McLennan, a fan chained to a desk in the City of London, started a long-running and wide-ranging fanzine with between 3 and 5 issues a year, depending on pressures of work and outside life. From January 1989, started as an attempt to keep his individuality while being a cog in a corporate machine. He and a few other like-minded souls produced articles, reviews, press clippings, and whatever amused them. And from issue 6, summer 1990, it also featured occasional pieces on anime, manga, and even fanzines. A special issue devoted to a 1992 anime convention features a very personal overview of anime fandom in the UK and US, a fascinating list of most requested illegally copied items in one UK and one US fan group, with usable statistical explanations, a Totoro skit, and an ad for a 1993 US convention. Zines like Trash City, although not directly anime fanzines, are a really useful way of citing anime and manga fandom in their wider mass cultural context. And it's fun. It's a sometimes perverse but always engaging read, and a fine example of the way anime and manga and their fandoms and fanzines were perceived in other fanish areas. It's totally archived online. You can see the whole run. But now we get to the starting point, anime at UK conventions in 1990. The British National SF convention, known as the EasterCon because it's held every year at Easter, was called EastCon. The name was actually chosen because the convention was originally being held in East Anglia. but disaster struck the venue and it was relocated to the Britannia Adelphi Hotel in the northwestern port of Liverpool. But it would have been too confusing for all concerned to change the name. Now, the 1990 EasterCon held the first documented anime showing at a British convention. But there had been small informal screenings in fans' homes for at least a year or two beforehand, because after all, you could buy anime in small video shops and home video rental stores, as we've seen. And there were also illegal tape trading networks that were active at the time. From 1988 to 1991, there was a separate Easter convention celebrating visual media and TV. Its name was Elidor, and it was intended to cater to those fans who found the traditional EasterCon, with its focus on literary SF and personal fanzines as a form, less satisfying. Fans who wanted a focus on TV and film SF. Elidor 1990 is known to have had anime shown in one of its video rooms by long-standing anime fan Jay Felton, and Elidor 1989 may have had informal screenings, but no documentary evidence has been uncovered beyond two brief references in correspondence with other fans. So far, online searches have failed to uncover an Elidor 89 or 90 program or convention book, or a convention report or a review mentioning the anime screenings there. So although we know that those screenings were there because I knew Jay Felton personally, and I have absolutely no reason to suspect that she would say there were screenings if they weren't, we can't actually trace any evidence of whether or not they were part of the official con programming and whether or not people engaged with them. But very quickly after EastCon 90, anime fans began to use the postal service, the phone, and the still limited but spreading home computer network to contact each other. And they began to coalesce into small, localized, passionate fan groups. Anime UK newsletter, which started up just after the convention, was handmade. My partner and I pasted it up, typed it out painstakingly on a typewriter in columns, cut and pasted the columns and the artwork, photocopied, posted out, and waited for reaction. Steve and I kept up a bi-monthly schedule from the first issue, 28th of May 1990, all the way through to the final issue on 30th of November 1991, after the launch of Anime UK magazine. Anime UK magazine was a pro publication, but it honoured its roots by reviewing and publicising fanzines. And this gave fan editors and creators a place to send their work and get a review. This publicity was part of a network of opportunities that fed the growth of the anime fan market. Anime clubs were also providing really useful meeting points for fans and really useful places for fan artists and fan writers to coalesce. Anime Kyo, up there in the Anime Kyo news in the top, let's see, probably right-hand corner as you're looking at the screen, was founded by Carlo Bernardi in the summer of 1990. Its newsletter, heavily influenced by Anime Hashin's The Rose, the American newsletter Carlo subscribed to, was packed with fan art, news, listings, ideas, contacts, places to trade tapes, places to read more about anime. Anime Babes was a very exceptional club. It was founded in 1994 by Lisa Munns and Laura Watton, who was soon joined by Lisa Say and Amy Clark. And it was devoted to girls' interests in anime. Not that men were excluded. The fanzine and the newsletter were available to females and males alike, and men were welcome to contribute. But the idea was that the angle, the interest, would be driven by what interested the four very feisty young women who ran it and their contributors. Minami Anime was set up in 1994, and they went on to create Minami Con, the longest running UK anime con, which is still active today, in 1995. And alongside this, there was a booming number of college and university anime clubs. Most students could get some form of funding and space and support for running a special interest club at college. And anime, we can borrow the video machines, we can use the college accommodation, we can show anime, was a very, very popular source. There was an archive known as Brit Anime, which enabled college students to see whether there was a club in their uni, and if not, would publicize it for them if they set it up. Links with US clubs led to correspondence, transatlantic memberships. not so many transatlantic memberships because there was a lot of difficulty then around sending money abroad. You had to either send it through a bank, which was expensive, particularly students who might not have a bank account if they were still in school and not at uni, or you had to buy international postal orders and post them. It was a complicated thing to encourage actual international cross memberships. Could be done, and we know it could be done, but it really wasn't as easy as it is now, when it's simply a matter of putting your club on the internet, putting your ideas on the internet, and finding like-minded people. But the great benefit of anime clubs from the fanzine point of view is that they became another way of finding out about fanzines or promoting and selling your own zines. The economics of it stacked up well, like the economics of selling through gaming shops and SFF shops. A copy sent for review to a club with 50 to 100 members meant that you were reasonably sure that one or two would buy your zine, which would more than cover your costs and might get you regular buyers or new contributors. Therefore, the growth of anime clubs was excellent for the growth of anime fanzines. But the market at anime conventions was beyond compare. One might have as many as 200 to 500 people at a convention, a large convention, any of whom might buy your fanzine. The first anime fanzine in the UK was Anime Day 1991, and a series of 4 anime days were run by Sheffield Space Centre in Sheffield, and very successful and very much enjoyed. But organising them, getting a venue, taking time out of the shop meant a big, big commitment for a small and very busy private individual retailer. So that eventually led to the demise of Anime Day, but by then, fan-run conventions had stepped in. MinamiCon 1 in 1995 followed on from the last Anime Day in 1994. Anime UK magazine held a con. Contanimated con was held in 1993, and a series of independent cons, including Shirenkai, followed. IACon ran from 1998 to 2013, and there are newer conventions now. And just as Britanime had listed college and university anime clubs, of course, it also began to list UK anime conventions. And these were such prime sites for selling your fanzines, recruiting new writers and artists if you wanted them, and just picking up ideas, information, contacts, and support from other fanzine editors. It was a very small scene compared with today, a very poor scene, both in terms of technological resources and cash, but it had boundless ambition, and it had an awful lot of people who were willing to help you out. There was also, of course, anime in UK SFF shops and game shops, as we mentioned, and that's still pretty important. In June this year, Red Rooster site listed the 7 best anime and manga shops in London. That was quite a surprise to me because I hadn't been anime and manga shopping in London for quite some time. So I had a look, and it was very interesting to find that there are 7 shops there. But prior to this point, there had been anime and manga available if you were prepared to venture into the wilds of Japanese shopping, because there were 2 Japanese shops in London that stocked anime and manga: Books Nippon by St. Paul's Cathedral before the area was redeveloped, and the Japan Centre in its original home. And from these absolute treasure troves, you could, if you could take the staff, a photograph of the cover, preferably with a clear title in Japanese, you could order that book. And you cannot imagine how difficult this was back then, or how thrilling it was to have a way around it. You could go in there and you could order a copy of a book on Godzilla that you had perhaps seen advertised in a Japanese zine. You could buy a Japanese zine, you could buy New Type, you could buy all the Japanese anime and manga zines. They cost a fortune, but you could get them. So shops like that were an absolute godsend. But when established shops where other fans congregated began to carry anime and manga items, that seemed like heaven indeed. The Sheffield Space Centre was obviously an enormously successful venue for all this, but Forbidden Planet in London and many other shops picked up. And that is still going on. The idea that you can nowadays walk into Waterstones and not only find racks of anime-related manga and other manga for sale, but you can also have specific shonen or shoujo nights events where you can go and talk and have fun and mix with other fans seems an impossible mirage to those of us back there in the day. It was spreading. It was penetrating at least fanish culture. And from there, it would go on to penetrate wider culture. And what were the fanzines produced over this long period like? Well, even at the beginning, as I've said there was diversity and there was ambition, huge diversity and enormous ambition. Photocopied, so not so diverse in that sense, and also restricted to 2 sizes, A4 and A5 for the most part. A4, because as the anime babes did with their newsletters, you could quite easily edge staple an A4 zine. A5, because if you were lucky enough to know someone who worked in an office or to have someone at home, perhaps working for a church magazine or perhaps a parent who produced a newsletter for some local group, you might have access to a deep-throated stapler that would enable you to staple down the middle of an A4 sheet, fold it and create an A5 zine. This was top technology back in the early 90s. That was what the available materials and the available technology allowed. Color photocopying was in its infancy and it was very expensive. So if you wanted color on your cover, unless you were going to splash out a lot of money, you had colored card. Some people actually tried to hand color their covers, but really try to do that on a 50-issue print run, it will drive you crazy. On a 100-issue print run, it will be practically impossible. Many of these photocopied newsletters and zines were copied on office or church or club copiers with or without permission. So it took some time for zine tech to develop. But within those restrictions, you could do anything you could draw, just as in anime. And as you can see, there were very different styles, very different levels of artistic development and very different ideas at work in British anime and manga. The UK's first anime fanzine. I was asked that question in spring 1993 when we received our first request to publicize a new fanzine. And it was pretty obvious that the requester, David Cotterill, who goes by Dragon in anime fandom, had never heard of Robotech UK back in 1986. But that's reasonable because David was a university student and an 18 or 19-year-old in 1993 would have been too young in 1986 to have any idea that an anime fandom had even been produced unless he happened to live near someone who bought a copy. That was a very small minority of people. So David genuinely thought, have I actually produced the UK's first anime fanzine? Animehem was a monthly zine with lots of news, info, bits of gossip extracted from the various, mostly American, anime bulletin boards and game boards available on the internet. And please note that in Anime UK at the time, the internet was still so new that I felt it necessary to say available on the internet computer network so that all our readers would understand what we were talking about. Many still just didn't have access to a computer at home or indeed at work or at school. David, alas, was about 3 weeks too late. The second anime fanzine, which was Jonathan Week's Animation, did pretty much the same kind of thing David was doing, but scavenging its information from newsletters, flyers, distributors' production lists, as well as from the internet. And that appeared in 1992 and ran until October 2004. So Animehem, Dragon's magazine, was the third British anime fanzine, but it was a pretty brilliant effort. Now, how did these fanzines divide down into different types? Well, that news, reviews, opinions format was a very, very popular one. These three here, Animura, edited by Andrew Salter for his Dojin Group Samurai Press, Animace with a fabulous Melissa Hyland cover, founded by Paul Cook, but later edited by Mel herself, and Legend of the OVA Fiend, edited by Robert Lynn Davis and Adrian Saxon, were all, Sexton, I beg his pardon, were all aiming to give interviews, news, reviews, ideas, fan art. OVA Fiend specifically wanted to give an alternative view, a sort of heavy metal, boys just want to have fun vibe, away from the fantasy quests, cat girls, and other typical anime tropes. Animes, as you can see, went heavily on cute, but also included a major interview with Andy Frayne, the head honcho at Manga Video, although sadly Andy left Manga Video before the interview could appear, so it was more of a historical record piece. But as you can see here, very diverse and very individual styles. And more of the same, Red Leopard by Peter Cullen, who chaired Shinenkai, and Future Anime by Keith Elcom, offering a widespread look at all manner of different things, including sausages, a matter of great interest to most anime fans, anime shopping up north, and more Dominion reviews, and is Pat Labor worth all the fuss? And reader art, check out your artwork inside. More fanzine editors sold multiple copies of zines on having artwork in there from someone who would buy copies for their mum, their gran, their aunts, and all their friends than we can possibly count. Doujinshi, fan manga circles, made fanzines, and these were some of the finest. It was very, very easy to see when you looked at British manga that it was packed with interest. James Taylor, who published it, really devoted himself passionately to diversity and different types of stories and art. Not all of them, obviously, at this stage, had developed as far as they would. And that's the case with almost every anime and manga doujin. Artists start out with new ideas. Hopefully, they are able to complete all the work that they do. That doesn't always follow, and a number of fanzines had a 2 or 3 part series, which would collapse after part 1 or part 2, but there was enormous energy and enormous diversity in them. Laura Watton's Biomecha there in its first incarnation, and the Manga Playground, a wonderful offering from Martin Taylor that had some real ambition in both its art and its stories. Fan fiction was a totally separate entity in itself. A few zines would have a 1-page or 2-page fan fiction story. Tales from the Cajun Sushi Bar, which first appeared in 1993, was totally devoted to fan fiction. Some art, but only in service of the fiction. And interestingly, it was sold first at UCAC, the UK Comic Art Convention. So the editors, John Spencer and Peter J. Evans, and their contributors went straight to where they would get a large science fiction audience that wanted text fiction as well as comics. They ran 5 issues. It was a fabulous zine. It was always well reviewed in every source. And it is of all the fanzines that I lost in my last house move, it is the title I most regret losing. 2 of the editors, Peter J. Evans and James Swallow, are published novelists, and Swallow has also written for the Star Trek universe. So you were getting, in its early form, some high quality writing here. At least one more anime fanzine followed in its fiction-only footsteps, in fact claiming Tales from the Cajun Sushi Bar as its main influence. David Trivette's Anime Angels contained 2 complete stories, both by the editor. One was devoted to the Lovely Angels, aka the Dirty Pair, popular anime characters, and the other was a TV SF mashup parody in anime style, featuring thinly disguised X-Files characters in Fireball Hex File 5, a title nodding to a classic Super Marionation puppet series. Fanzines devoted to single shows were also enormously popular. If you loved a show particularly, then you would be likely to buy a fanzine devoted to that show. And so a number of fanzines would run specials devoted to one show, but some fanzines were just aimed at one show. Manga Effect and its Bubblegum Crisis special were hitting a market that was very popular in the UK. But Philip Lasky's UY UK News was a wonderful gift to every Urusei Yatsura fan. Rumiko Takahashi's manga and anime was ridiculously popular across fandom, not because it's not very good, it is, but because fans invested in it enormously, identified with its characters, to the extent that for more than 10 years in UK fandom, you could not go to a convention without 3 Urusei Yatsura cosplayers. UI UK News was Phil's homage to his favourite show, and Cyber Age, started by 2 of the Anime Babes members, Vanessa Wells and Leah Holmes, was an homage to Cyber City Oedo 808, a very, very popular show with female fans. Girly and ecchi. I'm not going to show you any ecchi or hentai zines, although they did exist and were widely advertised and popular with male fans. Most of their editors and contributors to these zines felt that they weren't made with or contributing to any disrespect for women or disregard for their dignity. In fact, it seems to me that a number of anime fans back then saw ecchi as simply an alternative pronunciation for edgy, for something that celebrated alternative sexuality, which usually involved falling out of small clothing, female fans, that is. After all, if you're drawing Tammy, you're drawing a character who is established as wearing a leotard made of dental floss on its bottom half. And the fact that she has military insignia on said leotard and her beret makes her a respected member of a fighting force, doesn't it? Well, it was an essential element in fandom, in most fandoms, in fact. There was a good deal of ecchi and hentai under other names in science fiction fandom. But in British anime fandom, it was part of a much wider mix and had its place. Anime Babes, as we've already mentioned, was by girls for girls. It was set up to encourage a female viewpoint and a female voice in a market that could often seem very dominated by people who just wanted to perv over partly dressed cat girls. And the tendency still common in fandoms, in many fandoms, not just anime, to assume that females were there to wear cute costumes, have their shows mansplained to them, and fetch the tea. It was founded by Lisa Munns and Laura Watton, who were soon joined by Lisa Say and Amy Clark. And they really were babes. They were still in school. The zine eventually folded because they all had to take A-levels. But it made a huge impact. A number of its founders and contributors went on to work in media, the arts, education, advertising, and branding, as well as contributing to further Fanta-Pro initiatives such as artist collective Sweatdrop Studios. And as mentioned earlier, 2 of the members of Anime Babes, Vanessa Wells and Leah Holmes, went on to create their own fanzine, Cyber Age, devoted to the show Cyber City Oedo 808. But real world girls could be just as popular as cat girls, and this was a groundbreaker. Keith McDowell's Lucy's in Deep was a police procedural in which a rookie cop, just about able to pass as a high school girl still, goes in undercover to a high school to try and bust a drugs ring. It's a deeply mature piece, surprisingly foregrounding faith. In fact, I think possibly the only fanzine that foregrounds religious faith, in that one of the characters is a committed Christian and explores the conflicts there. And it was a very, very fine piece of work. McDowell had already done some work on short comics for Dojin publisher Gaijin Press, but Lucy's in Deep took his writing to a whole new level. I don't think he delivered anything else after this, certainly nothing that I'm aware of, but it was a good thing to deliver. Gradually, fanzines began to transition to pro publishing. Laura Watton was beginning to take her work to another level, and she turned out work with other fans, including Japanese fans, and began to sell more widely. And Martin Dubman founded United Publications out of a passion for furry fandom, fandom for characters that are part animal, part human. Wildside was a really original zine. The Zen Zebra story on that Steve Kite front cover was written by poet and singer Talis Kimberly and drawn by respected comic artist Fox. So zines had begun to become much more ambitious and reach much more widely. We intersected with other fandoms, with gaming, with rock and roll, and with comics. But very often, all those fandoms wanted was a cover, was something fashionable to catch the eye. Roll Call, edited by Rachel Ryan, was actually interested in anime and manga fans because there was a good deal of intersection between role-play gaming and anime. But for the most part, still, in the mid to late 90s, we were accustomed to being regarded by most of fandom as the decorative element, rather than an element they embraced with true commitment. And then this happened. Again, it's a heavy slide, but it's a heavy subject. Over a relatively short time, most of the norms of anime fanzine publishing were wiped out by the gradually accelerating progress of internet and handheld devices. It wasn't until 2009 that 50% of Britons had broadband access at home, and high-speed broadband began to be introduced. But by that time, we already had so much more in the way of design tools online, and so much more in the way of communications available to us online, that the effect on information sharing and print publication has been transformative. And the print fanzine and club newsletter have been among the casualties in the UK. But here are some of the ghosts in the post-millennium machine. I mentioned Brit Anime before, a wonderful site which mostly is now unavailable, but which still has some content. Not only Duncan Lawgreen's Brittany May Manga, but also a partial list of 1990s fanzines and anime fan clubs, which we can use as a jumping off ground for more exploration. Other ghosts in the post-millennium machine, included Revolution Baby, which is anime fandom's own roman à clef by Subi, Sam Brown, who postulated a world in which anime fandom has literally taken over the UK, and not to good effect. And Sam's partner and sometimes fellow writer Mary Beard went in a totally different direction, talking about philosophy, existential questions, and friendship through Elephant, Elephant, Hippo, Rhino. Quite a beautiful zine and one of my treasures. But life took over in more ways than one. The Anime Babes girls had to fold their efforts under the pressure of A-levels, and in September 2004, Jonathan Weeks announced the suspension of Animagin. Conflict of interest at work, lack of time. A zine that had run for a very long period was now no more, but it is archived. And of the 3 websites Jonathan suggested as alternative anime, manga, and fandom news sources, 2 are still operating online. Sweatshop Studios also evolved from the fan scene and is now a major doujin collective, selling work and also teaching, advocating, and assisting its members to make the transition to professional levels. All its work is online, with including some work that's no longer available, is registered online and noted online. So it's a very good place to explore the evolution of the professional side of British anime and manga work. You can easily go back and look at fan artists evolving their work towards professional levels, many of them making the transition into professional artwork. And Laura Watton's case is probably a classic study of how a second wave fan coming into fandom full of enthusiasm and with nascent talent has been able to build a career through doujin work and then through work with Sweatdrop to major publications in many areas. Laura's career is a really interesting study, and she's also a very gifted artist. So there we are. There's the future of UK anime fanzine research, and it starts with so much to do, so little time. I feel that with this brief sketch, there's still so much more that I could do, and I hope to discover much more. We have challenges. We have all those challenges. Time is not kind to paper archives. Time is not kind to ephemera, and time is not kind to the undocumented. But I have very great hope that, given the interest in this talk and given the generosity of the people who've helped me out with information, photos, Laura, Leah, and many, many other very generous people, we will be able to arrive at a better understanding of the early years of UK anime fanzines before we actually lose everything that's left to us. So this is exciting. This is thrilling. We are in a race against time. We are in a race to an extent against technology. But what we're trying to do is give that technology a better understanding of its roots, and that's worth doing. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. This is amazingly informative and very exciting for the new future for the anime manga fanzine. So we already got a few questions on the Q&A box. And from Connor Holt, did the UK fanzines have any contact with fanzines in other countries, sharing their zines and maybe anime tapes?
That's a great question, Connor. In fact, we had contacts not only with the USA, but with France and Belgium, and a little later with the Netherlands and Germany. There were many, many fanzine and prozine publishers who got in touch with us through Anime UK magazine and through that to other fanzines. And so there was a certain amount of tape trading, definitely with America, less so with Europe, because the different videotape formats are a barrier. And although, for example, France's CCAM tape format would play on UK videotapes, video cassette recorders in black and white, it was quite off-putting when you could get a tape from America and play it on an American format recorder. So yes, there was a lot of liaison, and people began to see what could be done and share ideas and so on. But for tape trading, it stayed mainly with America.
Thank you so much. And next question from Jonathan Root. Are researchers in Japan interested in archiving and researching fanzines about anime and manga from Japan and the UK and Helen's findings? Are they unaware or perhaps uninterested?
Well, Jonathan, that too is a good question. I don't know how interested researchers in Japan are in archiving UK fanzines, because you must remember that they're in pretty much the same position that we are with regard to all this ephemera, except that they have the wonderful Yoshihiro Yonezawa Memorial Library. Yonezawa was a fanzine fanatic who archived everything he could lay his hands on, and that library is there as a fantastic resource. So definitely they are interested in archiving Japanese fanzines. Whether they have the same level of interest in archiving another fandom, I honestly couldn't say. That's really a question for a Japanese fanzine researcher.
Yeah, I visited Yonezawa Yoshihiro library in Meiji University, and so many documented in the shelf, but it's not really archived. We can access material still. That is wonderful. But it's a really good point to do record and archive and share this information with others. Thank you, Helen. And the next question is Philip Ebel. British comics fanzines were very professional by the later 70s. How much did this affect the manga and anime fandom? It was Paul Gravett's article in Marvel's Daredevils about manga in the early 80s that makes me aware of Japanese comics. It was only the imports from the USA of Lone Wolf and Cub and Mai, the Psychic Girl.
It's an interesting question. There was, in fact, very little crossover between mainstream comics fandom and anime and manga fanzines. We shared the same interest in the American reprints of Japanese comics that were coming over in translation, obviously. And we also had a wonderful regular comic mart at Central Hall, Westminster, which is where I first met Paul Gravett way, way back in the 80s. But the level of crossover between the fanzine areas was, as far as I can tell, quite limited. An awful lot of fanzine editors were coming out of other areas of Britain, the North, were coming out of working class areas, some the first generation of their families to go to university. And their focus and their time tended to be more on anime than on anime and manga as a part of wider comics. And we owe Paul Gravett a great debt for actually bringing anime and manga into the comics arena. But I don't think, it didn't seem to me that there was an enormous amount of crossover between the two fandoms.
Okay, thank you. And then comment from Philip. Robotech was a comic from Comico in 1985, which was imported into the UK.
Oh, that's an interesting comment. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Matteo Shostak. A great talk. Could you please go back to the 2UK News website, still running?
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand the question. Oh, the 2 UK News websites. You want me to go back to the slide? Let's see if I can do that. I'm afraid I can't do that. I'm fairly silly with slides. Let's try this.
I think.
Yeah, oh, yes, perhaps I can.
Yeah.
That was Jonathan Weekes's recommendation, wasn't it? So let's see if I can find it.
Yeah.
There we are. animeuknews.net and otakunews.com. So I hope that's useful. But I understand, Ryoko, that you are going to
yeah, the recording will be available, so you can check out later on. Thank you.
So if you can't get it off the screen, you'll be able to get it back from the recording later.
Yeah, thank you. And the next question from Adam Robertson. What was the impact of the anime distributors on the fan output? If I remember, I thought manga had a magazine which had fan-published materials and even regional fan coordinators.
Manga had a Manga Entertainment, the distribution label, had a club, the Manga Club, which definitely set up regional fan coordinators. And then their main purpose, obviously, was to sell manga product. That's what commercial fan clubs do. But there was definitely an influence there in that people who might only have picked up a tape on sale and wonder what else is there could go along to their regional area and go to an event or a meeting and meet other fans. And so in that way, come into the wider fandom. But generally speaking, Manga Entertainment didn't have much interest in promoting fan material that was unrelated to its own product. And there's no reason why they should have. That was what they were there to sell.
Thank you. And next question from Alice Marks. I know you mentioned problematic fan behavior in anime fandoms. What problematic behaviors were these, and how have they evolved over time?
It's not going to be possible to describe any individual things here, but I think I would point you in the direction of the Me Too movement, where a few women who had been speaking out for many years were finally joined by higher profile women speaking out, and a particular developing pattern of behavior was identified as undesirable.
So much. We got many questions here, so I'm just reading out as many as we can. So from Robert Cole, thank you for such an interesting presentation. I owe my career to reading your anime, a beginner's guide to Japanese animation when I was in the high school in the early 2000s. I'm now the historian at the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment in Oakland, California. And we have near weekly discussions about how best to approach preservation of fan-made materials, such as maps of games labels, fan art, and etc. Do you have any general hint, tips, guidelines for approaching this problem? Thank you.
Well, Robert, that's wonderful to hear, and thank you for saying that. And I am very glad to hear that your museum is approaching this with such seriousness. The two main enemies of the preservation of cheap, mass-produced paper are damp and light, as you know far better than I do as a museum conservator. And so the only thing I can suggest is get as much paper as you can and get it in temperature controlled conditions and out of light. Digitize it. The British Library has been for about 25 years digitizing all of its collections, including newspapers and broadsheets going back to the 1600s, to try and ensure that they can preserve the originals in temperature and light control conditions while making the digital versions fully available for reading and research. So what I would suggest is if you can get the funding, start digitizing as much as you can get and digitize things as early as possible and then put them away in a safe archive vault that has both temperature and light control. That's the best way to preserve them, I think.
Okay, thank you so much. Next question from Erika. Do you have any insight into how the Satanic panic affected UK anime fandom in the 80s and 90s? Or was that more of an American thing?
The Satanic panic is more of an American way of putting it, but we definitely had our own difficult political time. And in fact, the best thing I can suggest that you do with this is search for Leah Holmes's, in fact, look back at my second slide and have a look at Leah Holmes's MPhil treatise and the other material that she has posted online. She has an excellent presentation that outlines that whole issue in our area. And I really, really couldn't better it. She's done such meticulous research and got such good sources there that it's going to be very helpful.
Thank you so much. Next question. Are the doujins also archived online? It's an aspect of UK comics I've never come upon before.
I don't actually know of any doujin archives. Individual artists have archived some of their own material and some of them make it available online. But as far as a British doujin archive goes, it's a wonderful idea, but I don't know of one.
Thank you. And next question from Mason. Fantastic presentation, Helen. Was a pushback against emerging fandom in the UK on the part of traditional SF fans? As rough as I understand, it too have been in the US, or was it more accepting?
Having lived through it and having been active in SF fandom for about 6 or 7 years before I found anime, it was probably as rough as in the US. And I understand that anime manga fans in Japan had very much the same reception from traditional science fiction fans in Japan. And talking to other women active in fandom, it seems that in Japan, in America, and in Britain, we all had a fairly negative reception from certain elements of SF fandom. So that seems to have unfortunately been a general trend. Perhaps it was different in France, I haven't looked into it there, or in Belgium or in Germany, but certainly talking to other fans who went through that period in Britain, in America, and in Japan, it seems that that was not the most welcoming of times for us.
Thank you so much. We got a thank you message from Jonathan Lu, so I will convey, I'll send it to you later on. Thank you. And next question, we got a little bit time. Okay, so from Jamie, how do you think the impact of Superfly magazine influenced things? For a period, it was number of selling UK video games magazine. Helen had input within it, bringing anime and manga to wider audience.
Superplay, I think, was very influential. Future Publishing, who published Superplay, not only recruited me to do a column and a number of our writers to do a column, but also had the great good sense to get Will Overton, who is Anime UK magazine's first art director, to provide a string of absolutely astonishing covers. Will went on to a career in gaming, which was one of his first loves in gaming art. So I think Superplay was influential because it was a mass distribution magazine. And particularly when Anime UK folded, the fact that you could go into your local magazine store, WH Smith, and get a copy of Superplay meant that anime stayed in the forefront of fans' discussions and fans' minds as part of the gaming discourse. And of course, that goes right back to On Lee's gaming fanzines way back in '89. So it's been a constant thread. But yeah, I miss Superplay. They did a new issue, a kind of memorial issue a couple of years back, and it was great fun to be part of that.
Thank you so much, Helen. I'm really sorry that is all we have time for. The rest of the question I will send it to you later on, and if we can do, we will put some answer on the website with your recording later on. Okay, so thank you again to Helen for an excellent and illuminating talk. The lecture recording, as I said, will be available on the on our sister website soon after the lecture. So after the lecture finished, we also would like to ask you to fill in our feedback form after the event to help us understanding what you think or any suggestion from you. So your opinion and comments are very valuable as we look to improve in the future. Next month's third Thursday lecture will be on the 20th of October. We will update the lecture details on the event page of our website. And we will also send the lecture information through our monthly e-bulletin. Please sign up to the e-bulletin if you'd like to catch up on our recent events and news. I hope many of you will be able to join us for the next Thursday lecture. Lastly, the Sainsbury Institute wishes to give thanks to the Gatsby Charitable Foundation, the Great Britain Sasaka Foundation, and Yakult UK for supporting this lecture series. Good night.
Good night.